after weakening over the weekend. I must be honest, I did not think that was going to happen. Lee has now grown larger and has re-strengthened back into a Category 3 hurricane with maximum sustained winds of 120 miles per hour. Now, AccuWeather meteorologists warned the threat of impacts in New England is increasing.
Dangerous surf, rip currents along the majority of the East Coast are beginning and will worsen throughout the week. Now, the U.S. Coast Guard says that sea conditions had deteriorated along Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands with 10 to 15 foot surf, as well as some life-threatening rip currents. We've had a lot of problems with rip currents lately, and of course, Lee is going to make that issue worse as we move through the week.
All right, let's take you live to St. Thomas in the Virgin Islands as we continue our coverage with Lee. Quiet right now, and Lee getting a little better organized on the satellite picture. You can see that eye. You may be going through a replacement cycle right now.
Yeah, this is something that we track with major hurricanes, especially considering how powerful this storm is. As Bernie just mentioned, you can see the eye fading a bit. That to me doesn't say the storm is losing wind intensity. It says it's undergoing an eye wall replacement cycle. Essentially, the eye regenerates and we see this storm more or less stay at the same strength here. It's currently a Category 3 storm with maximum sustained winds of 120 miles per hour. Remember that Category 3 status is between 111 and 129 miles per hour on the Saffir-Simpson scale, which is the traditional scale for hurricanes. You can see that Category 3 right here. But what happens next with Lee? That's the big question, right? And that's what we're tracking so vigilantly here on the AccuWeather network. You have to think about three things when we think about these systems. Tropical systems need warm water. They need limited wind shear, so the difference in wind speed and direction high up in the atmosphere. And these storms need a ton of moisture. Dry air inhibits their development and their strength. Now, I don't think dry air is going to be the problem. Here's Lee on the water vapor loop right now. And while you'll notice some dry air depicted by that yellow shading, there's not nearly enough of it to be inhibiting to such a large storm that essentially has its own environment right now. The other factor we were just talking about is wind shear. Again, that's the difference in the wind speed and direction as you go up through the atmosphere. Here's Lee right here. You can see it circled in the yellow on the map. It's going into an area where the wind shear is a little greater. You can see this dark purple, which represents that stronger wind shear. And that is something we're going to watch as Lee makes that turn back to the north and east. But I don't think the shear is strong enough that it's going to completely tear Lee apart. And that's a major player here as we look through the next few days. The final ingredient, we talk about that warm water. Yesterday was actually the climatological peak of hurricane season, so where we generally see that activity tick up the most. A big part of that is because the water is so incredibly warm at this point in the year in the Atlantic. But you'll notice there is a pocket of cooler air from what was Hurricane Franklin. Now we are looking at Lee taking this turn here up toward that cooler pocket of warm water. So essentially it will stay a hurricane, a Category 2 at that, but it will lose some wind intensity because of that pocket. I would say more than just about anything else. That said, Bernie, we do still have plenty of problems as we track Lee north. It's still going to be a hurricane.
Yeah, and notice the window here. The possibilities, they are still very wide in the Atlantic. I want to go over that because there is a scenario that we could be looking at major impacts across eastern New England with the possibility of a landfall. But there's still a possibility this could be steered out to sea. Those two are still on the table. I want to explain them. First of all, this in from the forecasting department. Just this morning, we have now cleared the Virginia and North Carolina coast from rain and wind impacts directly associated with Lee. There will be some wind, certainly rough surf. That's going to be a problem all week. But as far as wind and rain from Lee, we have now cleared Virginia and the Outer Banks of North Carolina. Last week, we cleared that area from southeastern North Carolina all the way toward Miami, Florida. All right, here is the ingredients. Not the ingredients. Here's the scenarios. We have this dip in the jet stream. This is our first trough that is coming across the central United States. This is one of the keys. Now, if this trough is strong and continues to move eastward, then this is the way that Lee gets steered out to sea. Our midweek trough would just steer this out to sea, and we could even see it far east or just to the east of Nova Scotia and Newfoundland with limited impacts along all of the eastern seaboard with the exception of some rough surf and certainly rip currents. However, the other concern we have is as this trough starts to lift, it will miss Lee. It will not steer it out to sea. It'll leave it behind. In which case, then you have another dip in the jet stream late this week coming across the central U.S. And then this system, depending on its strength and how far west it would be steeringly back toward the United States. So when you look at our threat map here, our biggest threat for wind and rain impacts continue to be eastern Canada, all the way down in the Maine and down into Long Island. We still have not cleared Virginia Beach, Maryland, Delaware, and New Jersey. And then, so that's an area that we'll continue to watch.